Hey guys, we're going to talk about servers again today. In particular, moving my networking equipment and my Chia storage array from the 2x4 rack that I had built a few months ago into an actual server rack. I picked up another Supermicro CSE836 3U enclosure on eBay at an auction for super cheap a few weeks ago. I need somewhere to put it and I don't have enough space as is. So I went with the 25U open frame server rack by StarTech that is sold on Amazon. These particular racks had some fantastic reviews and some fantastic ratings. The rack arrived in a very long and heavy box. It was packed very well. Each piece was individually wrapped in a bubble wrap sleeve to prevent any sort of damage from rubbing together. And here are all the components laid out. We have 4 vertical posts, 4 side posts, 4 wheels, and a bag of assorted hardware. And this kit also included all of the tools you need to assemble this rack. So that's something you don't usually see when you buy something that requires assembly. Alright guys, so here is the assembled rack. And this actually came out pretty well. It's built a lot better than I was expecting. And that's good because this does need to support a lot of weight. The rack as a whole is rated for approximately 1,200 pounds. I think it said on the Amazon listing. And you can see the adjustments here on the side. Basically there are different numbers and you can slide this front to back just to adjust the depth of the rack. And the user's manual here has the settings you need for various mounting depths. So I went with the 29 inch. So I've got my sliders set on number 3 and number 4. And you can see it supports anywhere from 22 down to 40 inches, but I find between 29 and 30 accommodate most standard rail sets. And this has some pretty strong casters on the bottom, so this is great because I can wheel it around in case I have to pull it out from the wall just to adjust cabling, change mounts, or anything like that. So yeah, I'm very satisfied and very excited to get my equipment mounted up. So first up is going to be a patch panel. This is a 48 port patch panel manufactured by Cable Matters. And I picked this particular patch panel for a few reasons. First of all, I wanted 48 ports so I have room to expand. This is rated for Cat 6, so it can do 1 gigabit. It doesn't say 6A, but it should have no problem doing 10 gigabit as well. Additionally, on the back here, we have easily identifiable wiring colors for both the A and the B wiring method. Easy to use punch-down connectors. And as an added bonus, this also carries a UL listing for a communication accessory. So overall, I felt the quality of this particular patch panel was very good compared to some of the other ones. Amazon's got quite a few that are just rated for 5 and 5E. So I don't know why you would buy something that old at this point. So this does take up 2U or 2 rack space units. It will go up here on the first 2. And this patch panel came with square nuts, which will go in from the back of the rail here, and then just a standard Phillips screw with a washer to secure it down. So that nut goes right in from the back here and it simply clips on. Alright, so for the network switch, I picked up this Aruba. This is an S2500. It's a 48 port, 48 1 gigabit ports, and then we have 4 SFP ports over here. These are all 10 gig ports. So they can be used to connect 10 gig to individual workstations, servers, or like if you're stacking multiple switches together, there's 2 for stacking. And I went with this particular switch because it has pretty much all of the features I wanted. It's got 48 ports. I probably could have gotten away with 24 ports, but I think 48 ports is a good deal for what I plan to do going forward. It's got the 10 gig, like I said. It's got PoE, power over Ethernet, on all the ports. I believe this goes up to about 400 watts total. Which is great because I've currently got 3 wireless access points that are PoE. I've got 2 security cameras, I got a couple of Raspberry Pis, and I will be adding a few more cameras in the future. Just things like that is nice to have the PoE around. And you can see the messy way I'm handling PoE up here currently. I've got this 8-port PoE injector here, and this was working great for a while until I installed the newer access points that were wireless N and supported up to 300 megabit. This injector is only good for 100 megabit. So that resulted in the second Netgear switch down here, which does gigabit and PoE, but that only had 4 ports. I needed 5, so now I've got both of these PoE injectors here. So I can finally replace both of these pieces of equipment since the new switch handles the PoE. And this also supports VLANing, which is great. That's something I've been wanting to do for a while, and my current switch does not support it. It's an unmanaged switch. And there are no rails to mount this switch, just the 2 ears, and it did not come with any hardware. So I picked up a bag of the generic square nuts on Amazon. So that's going to sit right like this. It really would help to have a second person, I think, to hold this while I'm screwing this in, since there are no rails or support brackets. That looks pretty good. I was a bit concerned with having the weight of that switch supported by just these two ears like that, but I know that's how you mount them, and it does feel pretty solid. So next I have a number of accessories I need to put with the networking equipment that are not rack mount. Motorola cable modem, Netgate pfSense firewall, and the Dell mini PC that I used to run the Chia full node client on. To do that, I picked up this 1U shelf. So I'm going to slide that in here 2 U's down from the switch. All right, that looks and fits in there pretty good, and that gives me a nice space to put those components. So we've got 2, 3, 5 U's of this 25U rack used up so far. So now I'm ready to mount my Supermicro enclosures into this rack. Now unfortunately I have 3 of those cases and no rail sets. Those rail sets are very expensive on eBay. The cheapest one I saw was around 120 bucks, I believe. And I've got 3 servers, so as you can see that cost is going to add up very quickly. So what I found instead are these APC, these are made for UPSs I believe, sliding rail shelves. And you can see it's got this support ledge that comes out. So these should work pretty well for mounting and supporting those enclosures. And these were around $28 to $30 shipped plus tax, so much better deal when you're looking at buying 3 or even more rail sets. Now these enclosures are 3U height, so that puts me at 18, 19, and 20. However, there is one disadvantage to using these rail sets, and that is that I need to accommodate for the thickness of this support shelf here. There is actually not enough space between the servers when they're mounted with the actual rails. So if I put 2 rail sets, if I put one 18 to 20 and then put the second 15 to 17, because of the space this shelf piece takes up here. So the way I'm going to do this is I will mount each rail set 3 1/3 U. So I'll be 17, the first one into 17 up until the top of 20. So according to the instruction manual, these come in from the back. So these came with a Phillips screw and this little cone-shaped washer thing, which should hold the screw in the center of the square support here. Alright, and you can see how those rails look there once they are installed. So now I can simply slide my Supermicro enclosure back. Now one thing to keep in mind though is that the shelf does not extend the whole way to the back there. You can see it stops about 3/4 of the way. That is not a problem with my particular use case because most of the weight is in the front of the enclosure where the hard drives slide in and mount. So that weight will be situated right on top of these rails. However, if you have a server with weight in the back, you don't want your server to essentially tip off the back. So we'll see how these work out here long term, but I'm thinking it'll work pretty well. Alright, so this is the computer I've been using for a home server here. In addition to hosting Chia, this hosts my NAS, my network attached storage, and I've got a number of virtual machines I run just for learning, for work, for that type of stuff. And there's really nothing special about it. It's not even server grade hardware. This is an i7-3770 CPU and a BioStar motherboard, really just spare parts I had. It's really due for a rebuild with how old it is, but I'm not really interested in spending the money or doing that at this point. So I picked up this old Supermicro server chassis. I really just wanted the chassis from it on eBay. It's the 2U, I think it's the CSE 826 version. It's got a motherboard, dual power supplies, it's got the trays. It also came with the rail kit. Now again, I just wanted the chassis. I'm not interested in all this stuff. So this motherboard is going to come out, and then I'm hoping I can put that i7 motherboard down in here. This does support ATX size motherboards, and I do believe I can fit that original Intel fan and still have room above it for air to circulate. I'm going to have to check that out. One problem I did run into though is that the backplane that comes with this unit uses an SFF 8087 connector here. The other Supermicro enclosures I've had or I have looked at all had 1-to-1 SATA ports coming out the back. I cannot add a second HBA to that computer because it only supports one controller and it's got to be in a specific slot, nor do I really want to do that. So I took out this backplane here, and it looks like if I take the hard drives and simply slide them in the front without the backplane, I can still access all of these SATA connections on the back here, the power and the data, for connecting to the new motherboard. So I'm hoping it's as easy as that. That motherboard fits in there perfectly. I was a little bit concerned it wasn't going to fit. CPU power supply cable reaches, the main motherboard supply reaches. There is plenty of room over this fan, I believe, for it to do proper circulation. We'll definitely be monitoring the temperature of this just to make sure. Was able to locate the original low profile brackets for the SAS controller and both of the NVMe risers, so those fit in nicely. I do have to figure out which of these two pins are for the power connector for the front to turn it on and off. Aside from that, I removed the original fan housing that held the 3 fans into place, because these fans are very, very powerful, but they also sound like a jet engine, and there are 3 of them, and I don't want to hear it. So I have 3 of these Silenex fans I've used before. I'm hoping they move enough air. I'm not 100% sure. So the plan's going to be to simply attach these to the center support like so. These 3 fans will then cool these hard drives, as well as exhausting out the CPU air and all the other component air from the motherboard compartment. And I'm retaining all of this original hardware, you know, just in case down the road I want to get a new motherboard and actually rebuild this computer the right way. Alright, I've got a 10 terabyte Iron Wolf. This is my NAS storage. I do have a second one of these I want to install at some point, and then get a third so I can do some sort of parity. But that's a separate project for another time. And then I have an old 2 terabyte Seagate that I use for my camera DVR. And then I've got a pair of 2.5 inch Kingston SSDs. This is for the OS, and these are in a software RAID 1. Alright guys, so I got everything in here. That push button for the front, it turns out that was very simple. It was pins 1 and 2 with the power button. So I just used a piece of old audio cable here to splice that back to the motherboard. So we're going to go ahead and give this a test to see if it actually turns on with that button. I have the SSDs unplugged just so it doesn't boot up while I'm not ready here. Alright, and there we go. So we're down to 89, 90 watts. That's not too bad. It's a little more than I would like, but this is an old CPU. So maybe we'll do a follow-up on this someday, you know, a few months down the road, and we'll actually rebuild this with the more modern setup. But for the time being, the point of this build is to get it in the rack, and that's what we're doing. Oh, I did want to say too that these fans are moving quite a bit of air here, so I don't think there'll be any problem with either cooling of these couple drives or exhausting the air from the CPU out the enclosure. This is moving a lot of air here. So, alright, so one final thing before we close this up and get it tested. Going to put in this new NIC network interface card. This is a standard copper Ethernet, but it's 2.5 gigabit. I really wanted to get 10 gigabit in this box, but the cost of a 10 gigabit card, whether it be fiber or RJ45, are kind of pricey. So on board it's got 1 gigabit. This will upgrade it to 2.5 gigabits. Alright guys, so here's the completed setup. You can see everything is connected and running. So on the very bottom shelf here I have an old Dell PowerEdge 1950 chassis. Just using that as a shelf for my UPS. The UPS is not very happy right now. I think I'm nearing its maximum rating. I did put new batteries in, but I do still see the lights blinking, and yes, I've run the calibration. I don't know what's wrong with it, but we'll address that later. I've got my 3 CSE836 servers. That's JBOD 1, JBOD 2, and JBOD 3. And you see I still have 10 empty bays here. That drive is currently filling, that's why it's blinking. And then I've got my CSE826 where my farmer and virtual servers are running. On the little shelf I installed here, I have my cable modem for my Comcast internet service. I've got my Dell Mini PC that I use to run the Chia farmer. I've got my Aruba S2500 switch. This thing actually does use quite a bit of power. It's idling around 60 or 65 watts, so I may end up swapping this out for a 24 port version in the long run. You can see I've got about 18 ports in use. I have a couple things not plugged in yet. This line here is going down to the new 2.5 gigabit NIC that I installed. So I've got 2 SFP 10 gig modules here. The 10 gig modules can also do 2.5 gig. And then lastly on top I have my 48 port patch panel. So you can see how I've got all the network cables nicely bundled. I put in this piece of angle aluminum here to tie them to. Velcro ties for easy adjustment. Those cables then go back up the wall, and I've got some pipe supports that run them out to the various areas they are going. Unfortunately, that shelf did not have enough room for my pfSense firewall, so I stuck that back here on top of the switch for the time being. In the long run, I would like to get a more powerful system for this, and at that point I would probably switch it to a rack mount 1U. And here we can just see the back of the patch panel, very easy to install and punch down. All of the cables coming out are labeled as to where they go. So all of these labels here correspond to a jack somewhere in the house, and they match to the jack number on the patch panel. So I pulled this out here just a little bit so you can see the back. It's pretty much, those enclosures are just this SFF cable 8088 that goes down to each one and kind of chains them together. And there's not too much to see back here. It's not too exciting. So yeah, it's been running for several days like this. I haven't had any problems whatsoever. And you can see we're right around 700 watts for the entire setup. And that's not only the equipment you see here. I've got 6 PoE devices plugged in, some access points and stuff. So those are also pulling power from this setup. I do need to get a dedicated receptacle ran for my breaker panel instead of using an extension cord. So that's definitely on the priority to-do list here. But otherwise, yeah. So this video took me about a month to make. So if you don't mind, hit that like button before you go. And if you're interested in any of these components, I will leave links to everything I purchased and where I purchased it from down in the video description. And otherwise, thanks for watching.